Hey, welcome to the Cover One Fantasy Show. I am one of your three amigos, Greg Tompsett, along with my friends Anthony Prohaska and Rich Haynes. Rich, how we doing?
Honestly, doing pretty crappy, Greg. It's been a rough week.
It's funny you asked that. It sucks.
It's been terrible, let's be honest. So multiple reasons as to why. And, first world problems, I suppose. But one, I took it on the chin last week in my sports bets for the first time
Same
all year. I mean, I was rolling, I can't remember what it was, 23 or 25 and 10 or 11, something like that. And then I got absolutely smoked last week. So, not stellar from that perspective. I was there at the Browns-Steelers game, so that wasn't very fun. And then obviously all of the chaos and the circus that is currently surrounding the OBJ saga. It's like a soap opera on Brown's Twitter. Sometimes I just escape over to Bill's Twitter to try to get some calm, some calm and normalcy in my life a little bit right now. But and maybe we'll talk about OBJ a little bit later. But yeah, it's been honestly, it's been a little bit of a rough week. So I'm hoping for a better week this week in all regards from a football and fantasy football standpoint.
I support it. Hey, Anthony, are you doing slightly better than that? How much Derrick Henry did you have on your teams?
I have no Derrick Henry.
Okay.
I don't either. I have zero Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
Boom. Here's where my frustration lies from last week, right? So I have a decent amount of shares of Kyler Murray. So watching the Cardinals put up 21 points and Kyler getting no touchies and the interception at the end because AJ Green doesn't know what a pass is, that was frustrating.
Yeah.
I've got some shares of Jalen Hurts. The Eagles put up 41 points. Jalen Hurts had no touchdowns, but he was tremendously efficient. He rushed for 70 yards, but friggin' Boston Scott had 2 rushing tutties, and Jordan Howard had 2.
Did you guys for sure know that Jordan Howard was still in the NFL?
No, I saw that they called him up from the practice squad, and I was like, "Oh, Jordan Howard."
Yeah,
okay.
I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about him."
Right?
How does Kenny Gainwell look so good in the preseason, and then they're just like, screw it, we're gonna go get Boston Scott and Jordan Howard
every week up to this past game when they had Miles Sanders? It was like, well, we're still gonna keep putting Gainwell in there, still putting Gainwell in there, and then Sanders goes down, and it's like, well, now's the chance for Gainwell, and they're like, nope, Boston Scott and Jordan Howard.
Yeah, I had one on the Lions too. that did not go well.
I said on the episode last week, I said I was confident that the Lions were getting their first win.
Yeah,
last week I was like, yeah, Detroit, you're doing it, baby, and you just got punked. Like you just got clowned by the Eagles. It's terrible at home. It's rough.
Just a little unfortunate, and then we've hit in our collective fantasy league team that we share. We've hit a bit of a snag and some, bad puck luck recently. And then the Calvin Ridley news, at the last minute he pulls out and now he's stepping away, which I think is tremendous for him to have the confidence in saying, the whole mental health thing and why he's stepping away, so there's no judgment on us for that. Sure. But it's just bad puck luck, which, we had
no
AJ
different than an injury. Like you can't be mad at the player that they got hurt. You can't be mad at him that he's not in the mind space to like be out there risking his body. But all of a sudden you're like, oh man, now I lost another guy, and you're having to react. And it's a weird spot to be in.
It's unfortunate, and that was starting to be a cool. I know the Falcons are looked down upon a little. That was a cool unit with him potentially coming back. The emergence of Cordero Patterson, and then Pitts is starting to
finally
get more work
finding a way to use Kyle Pitts.
Actually, in that scenario, I actually got lucky in a keeper league where I was selling this year the trophy right here. The 3 straight titles is no longer going to be in my possession. A few times,
What's
hanging out. No ghosts behind it today.
Thank goodness.
From that standpoint. But I actually sent Calvin Ridley and Najee Harris to a team for Justin Jefferson. Jefferson's a very low round keeper. Najee Harris and Ridley, so I got pretty lucky there because I sent Ridley off a week and a half before that news came down. So, but yes, I agree with all your comments regarding the mental health aspects. Hopefully he gets his help and all that kind of stuff.
And obviously, let's start with some of the news. Let's start with guys like Ridley and Henry. That obviously the first spot is we had this exact debate in our joint league is, okay, what do we do in Tennessee now? And you go into one, we have A.J. Brown. I think that he's probably one of the few, I don't want to say winners, but will maybe get a bump in this because I have a feeling that no matter who we discuss here in a moment gets the running back carries in Tennessee, no one's getting the amount of volume that Henry was getting. And we'll see about it. I don't see any path where they remain quite as run heavy as they were before. They're not all of a sudden going to flip and become the Buccaneers or the Chiefs or the Bills and like 70-30 passing the ball. But I don't think I don't think they're going to continue to be the run heaviest team in the league or top 3 when now, you look around the room and you're like, okay, well, I guess we have Julio and A.J. Brown over here. So one, we'll start with you, Anthony. Thoughts on how much of a shift you think they'll see? And then obviously the two names are the Titans officially signed Adrian Peterson and already had Jeremy McNichols. So McNichols had been kind of just a passing down back, very limited in the rushing work. So do you think that continues? Do you see Peterson? And then how much do you think shifts away from that as to whether it matters or not? And then we'll go to Rich as well.
Sure. A lot of people who cover the Titans and who watch them started talking about once the Peterson signing happened that made complete sense because McNichols is meant to be the third down passing work guy, and he wasn't all of a sudden going to be the guy that was going to take over the lion's share of snaps and get the first down and second down work in addition to the third down work. I'm really interested just to see what Peterson brings. Like, he is kind of bionic, and even though he's 36, like if anybody could be an effective 36-year-old running back, it would be Peterson. I think off of volume, he's intriguing. I think both of them are going to end up being flex plays, and especially until we see like what shakes out. A
quick clarification on him: the last 3 years at ages 33, 34, and 35 in Washington, and Detroit, he played 16, 15, and 16 games in the last 3 years. So now effectiveness, efficiency, lots of fair questions there. But like, can he physically do it? The evidence says yes.
Yeah, and I think the Titan scheme, oddly, is decently beneficial for him. They like to run the inside zone and they like to run duo, and that blocking scheme works for Adrian Peterson. I think they end up both coming like shake out to flex plays until we see potentially one of them emerge. But I think Peterson gets more of that goal line work. I think he's somebody that could get anywhere from 10 to 15 carries a game. If he gets into the end zone, awesome. McNichols is going to be the guy on third down. And we really just need to see how it shakes out. This next upcoming game against the Rams, I feel like, is the worst matchup for them to start off with this new offense, because I feel like the game script and how this game could go could be misleading in terms of what that backfield share is going to look like. But I see them both as flexes right now. I'd probably lean a little more towards Peterson because he has more touchdown upside than Jeremy McNichols does. And then from an offensive, philosophy standpoint, I'm right there with you. As soon as Henry went down, the first thought that went into my brain was like, all right, well, 25 targets a game for A.J. Brown now. But what's interesting is this offense, it's so simplistic, and I don't mean that in a negative or derogatory sense, but their scheme and what they do and is just so like, we're going to run the ball really well, then we're going to suck you in with play action, and then we're just going to run crossers and stuff over the middle, get it into our playmakers' hands, i.e. A.J. Brown, and let them run after the catch. Everything is predicated upon that running game. So if they don't have the threat of that running game now, I worry about what the efficiency piece looks like for the passing offense as a whole. But I do think you will see more passes, especially given the opponents that they have coming up. So if I was an A.J. Brown owner, I would be a little excited, as evidenced by the ghost in the machine, backing up what I said there with that little noise. So I think Brown sees a heavy uptick in volume. Julio would probably see it as well. But A.J. Brown, not to sound terrible, is probably a beneficiary in this scenario. And then I'm leaning more towards Peterson than McNichols, but I want to see what that backfield looks like in terms of snap shares moving forward.
So how about you, Rich, as far as the shift in offense, and whether you kind of in the sense where, hey, it's late in the season, any playable running back is worth rostering, or are you intrigued or excited about what McNichols or Peterson could do?
I don't think I'm overly excited about either, but I do think AP continues to show he has some juice left in the tank. Obviously not this year, but in previous years, even given his age and in the mileage on the tires. So I actually am a little bit more intrigued by him than I am McNichols. But yeah, some of the comments that you guys are making, I think it is going to, they're certainly not going to feed either one of those guys 30 touches or anything like that, like they did, Derrick Henry. So I think Tannehill might get involved a little bit more in the run game, especially down around the goal line, which he's done in the past a little bit. But I think Adrian Peterson may be worth, certainly worth both are worth the roster spot at this point.
Yeah, for sure.
Greg, your point. But I'm not gonna do cartwheels over either one. I'm gonna, I actually got AP, I think, in 2 or 3 of my leagues this past week, and it's a guy I'm stashing on the bench. And hey, if I need to use him by week or whatever, I have one team that's really rough at the running back position, so I'll kind of monitor it and see, and see what happens. But yeah, so not overly excited, but certainly worth rostering.
So we got a couple questions here we'll look at, and then we'll kind of bounce back into maybe on the receiver side and with Atlanta with Ridley. So if Hopkins does not play, right now half of the Cardinals roster is not practicing. So there's plenty of question in whether who's going to be the quarterback, who are going to be the receivers. AJ Green is out. DeAndre Hopkins not practicing. Kyler Murray not practicing. It's pretty much Rondale Moore and Christian Kirk are the only people that are out there ready to play. He's asking, should he flex Emmanuel Sanders or Gordon? I'm going to assume that's Melvin Gordon in a PPR league. Last week was the first one we've had where Emmanuel Sanders just put up a complete dud. It wasn't really. There was 2 plays where Josh Allen missed him on a deep ball that would have been a touchdown, and Emmanuel Sanders had one where honestly I thought he caught it and then fumbled and kicked it out of bounds, and that was like a 25-yard play, and there was a penalty on the play. So the Bills got the first down anyways, and there wasn't a reason to challenge it, but I kind of think it would have been a catch in the yard. So it's one of those things where he played the whole game, ran the same amount of routes, had targets, and if those two connect, it's a weird game where it's 2 for 85 and a touchdown, and you're like, wow, that's kind of weird. He only had 2 catches, but everybody's happy because it's 2 for 85 and a touchdown, but they don't connect. So all of a sudden it's a 0, and it looks weird. I still think he's a pretty big part of that offense. Gordon is obviously last week shows he's a higher floor, but I think Sanders is the higher upside, especially with Javonte stepping in. Rich, do you feel far different than that?
No, but actually, in this particular situation, I think even in a PPR, I think I would lean Melvin Gordon here a little bit just because of what you said on the higher floor. Yeah. Both games are actually, interestingly enough, right around 48, 49, 49.5 from an over-under standpoint, just from a scoring perspective. Again, Buffalo's schedule right now is extremely easy, so they're going to have to score points early on against Jacksonville. I just get worried that at some point they may again take the foot off the pedal. Not that they did that last week because they were in a little bit of a scrap with the Dolphins, but that worries me slightly. I do have a question for both of you. And you may have already talked about it this week on the various Cover One shows. But was there any reason why Cole Beasley was as involved as he was the past week in Buffalo, and did that potentially take away from Emmanuel? Was that just kind of an albatross, and that's not something we'll probably see this week? Or what are your thoughts on Cole's usage last week?
I'll let you start, Anthony.
Cool. Cole Beasley's good at football, and they just realized it at halftime. No, it was a halftime adjustment. What Miami was doing, they were super aggressive in the first half against the Bills. They brought a lot of pressure looks. They brought pressure. They were playing man coverage on the back, a decent amount of cover 0. And the middle was open, but the Bills just seemed to not be prepared for that aggressive front that Miami was showing in that first half. Second half adjustment, they realized the mismatch that they had with Beasley, whether it was in zone in the slot and over the middle or when he was lined up in man coverage on Nick Needham. And once they realized that, they just spammed the hell out of it and just kept attacking the matchup. And that really was what it was. Miami, I know what the final score was. Miami played a good game, especially defensively last week. And the Bills, rather than trying to get too cute, they were just like, well, we know we can, this is a plus matchup. We can win right here. Let's just keep attacking it because they can't stop it.
It makes sense. And I figured that was something, along those lines, but obviously I don't break down the tape of Bills games like you guys do. So appreciate that insight.
Weirdly, the previous one in the Miami game earlier this year, Cole Beasley had 11 catches for 130.
So obviously,
So-
obviously something
Matchup
strange in the matchup.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but even with that being said, I mean, I think Emmanuel Sanders is certainly going to get more engaged this week, but I still probably would lean Gordon a little bit here just for the safer floor.
Yeah. And for anybody, I know there's obviously a lot of excitement around Javonte Williams. I think we joke about the different terms that get thrown around. There's a lot of wish casting of Javonte Williams more than forecasting. People want him to take over. Melvin Gordon still had more carries, more targets, more snaps in this last week against Washington. Now it's like a 55-45 split, but Melvin Gordon's still getting the majority of that, and he continues to get the touchdowns. He got one rushing and receiving.
And he's not, it's not like he's getting like 2.6 yards per carry or something. No. He's being fairly productive. He's not killing it, but he's being fairly productive. And I mentioned this in the preseason and as well as in previous weeks. They're paying that guy a decent amount of money, so if they're being productive. They're 4-4. They're not out of it yet by any means from from the standings perspective.
Conservative defensive coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is gonna be interesting to see with the loss of Von Miller there, but I just think Gordon's going to continue to get the ball enough to matter at least for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe towards the end of the season they'll transition it more towards Javonte. Especially if they fall out of it from a race perspective. But right now. I still think Gordon has that floor, like you mentioned, Greg. And he's, I think he's 4.7 per clip last week. So I mean, it's, he's doing something.
4.5, 4.5 on the season, 4.7 on the year, and not for nothing. 22 targets, 18 catches. It's 2 or 3 catches every game. So it's steady. He's getting double-digit receiving yards and 2 or 3 catches every week, and 40 to 60 rushing yards every week, and a touchdown every other week.
And a couple receiving touchdowns, too, because he actually had one against the Browns as well. He had a receiving touchdown last week and against the week prior against the Browns. So, I mean, he's involved there.
Anthony, I know you got a good question on Twitter when we put out the show here. You talk about getting just kicked repeatedly. So, at the end, he said, he lost Derrick Henry and James Robinson this past week. So, unfortunately, our man Patrick's hurting there. He has Kyler Murray as his quarterback. He's asking, and this is in a spot where it's tough because Kyler Murray hasn't practiced at all this week. His backup is Carson Wentz, who's playing tonight against the Jets, which certainly isn't a bad matchup. And for his, we joke all the time about Jalen Hurts. Carson Wentz isn't that far off. Don't misalign NFL quarterback with fantasy quarterback. Mm-hmm. Carson Wentz has been an okay fantasy quarterback. He's been a wretched real-life quarterback, but he's been an okay fantasy quarterback. Anthony, we'll start with you. Do you? I'll even ask this: do you make that decision tonight, or because my option is option 3, I pivot to a different backup and have to hope that there's somebody else out there that's not far off of a Wentz, and give myself 2 more days to find out if Kyler's playing?
That's exactly my strategy here. I hate Thursday night games in general. Weird things happen. I don't like games on short weeks for teams, and the Thursday night games are just a perfect microcosm of that. They're usually a mess. I do not trust Carson Wentz. Sometimes he looks like that QB that should have won the MVP the year that the Eagles won the Super Bowl before he got hurt against the Rams. And then other times he's throwing the ball.
He throws the ball, while he's floating in the air, left-handed in the end zone
for a pick six. And then again, that whole fourth quarter in OT is it's just so maddening. So he throws that stupid pick. Then he just marches them down the field. Granted, they were helped out by a pass interference call. Ties the game. We go into overtime. He makes another stupid throw. Interception. Colts lose. I do not trust Carson Wentz. I also, even if Kyler Murray plays, the 49er matchup, aside from one matchup that they had early last year, I believe, Murray has not done well traditionally against the 49ers defense. They are not a good matchup for the Cardinals. Hop is banged up. AJ Green is not playing because of COVID. Even if Murray plays, he's not going to be the regular Kyler Murray. He's not healthy. His run aspect is a little limited. I would pivot, and I say that as a Kyler Murray owner myself in multiple leagues. I'm planning on not playing him this week. I would pivot to another quarterback. He mentioned Jordan Love.
Jordan Love against Kansas City.
In a league where I have Russell Wilson, he's been out. I've been streaming quarterbacks. I dropped Matt Ryan for Jordan Love this week. As of right now, he's in my starting lineup. There's not a lot on that waiver wire. It was between him and Tyrod Taylor, and I was going back and forth on it.
Tyrod Miami, Taysom Hill against Atlanta.
Yep. You got some potential higher floor matchups. You know, I think all of those, like all three of those guys sound more intriguing than Carson Wentz, given the factors I mentioned earlier, and the uncertainty of Kaiir scares me a bit. So I think you could wait. Maybe some news comes out that Kyler's completely fine and you expect it. But even if he was healthy, the matchup isn't great traditionally against San Francisco. I would pivot to a third quarterback, given who's on that waiver wire there, and try and spot start somebody. Or you could go with Mike White, like Taylor mentioned, aka QB1.
Obviously. Rich, any thoughts on these late? How were you approaching leagues where you're maybe not settled at quarterback, or ones like this where now you're having to debate dinged up starter or playing a waiver streamer approach?
Yeah, I have no issue playing, a waiver quarterback, especially if your starter's dinged up. Especially in most leagues, they have the 4-point, passing touchdown. So Kaiir obviously separates himself quite a bit because of his legs. He usually gets a lot of rushing yards, usually gets the rushing touchdown. So Anthony's points, banged up, Niners are not a great matchup in San Francisco. I agree. I have Kaiir in 2 of my leagues that I'm doing fairly well in so far. I'm actually sitting Kaiir in both at this point. I actually, though, don't have any issue with Carson Wentz tonight. So a couple interesting things with Carson. He's right around QB 10, 11, 12, depending on scoring formats. He's not been a complete, wasteland at the position. I think the Jets are a pretty good matchup for him at home tonight. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's probably going to get the ball quite a bit. But if Mike White performs at all like he did last week, they could be in a little bit of a shootout, at home and going back and forth and having to still throw the ball. And Carson Wentz, for now 5 straight games, has multiple touchdowns. So this is 5 straight games, multiple TD games. He had a 400-yard game against Baltimore 3-4 weeks ago, 231 last week. His only dud, in my opinion, really was against the Niners. It wasn't even a dud. He threw for 150 yards, but he had 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. So I don't mind Carson Wentz at all tonight. I think I would just play him tonight. I do agree Thursday night games can be weird, but I would totally play Carson Wentz tonight and be fine with it. I don't, especially over somebody like Jordan Love. I don't know what I'm going to get out of Jordan Love. So I agree with all the Anthony's points on Kyler Murray, but I'm okay with starting Carson Wentz tonight.
Yeah, and I have actually quite a few eggs in the Taysom Hill basket, which makes me a little anxious. He showed last year when he plays, he's very Jalen Hurts-esque, like the fantasy output when you're going to have 10 to 12 carries as a quarterback and then play NFL quarterback. Like, he can still get you 175 and a passing touchdown, but if he gets you 60 or 70 rushing and a rushing touchdown, it just nets out.
Him and Mark Ingram are going to vulture so many touchdowns from Alvin Kamara. It's so unfair.
I'm already angry about it. And it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. He has not officially cleared concussion protocol. He did practice. They did intimate that that's on the way, but it's not official. That's there. So, yeah, I mean, someone like Carson Wentz is a much surer thing. I mean, he scored, like you rattled that off, that's 5 straight 20-point weeks in most leagues from a fantasy scoring standpoint. So that's a pretty solid bet. And when you don't know what version of Kaiir you're getting anyways, that's probably the safer move. Spin, always listening to us here. He's got 3 different questions, so we'll start one at a time. So Hunter Henry versus George Kittle. George Kittle's first week back. We'll start with that one, but also Brandon Cooks and Cole Beasley. And then out of this, Michael Carter, Kenneth Gainwell, Latavius Murray.
Sheesh.
Everybody take it in for a second. Richard, you want to take
I mean, just off the top of my head, I believe Tarad's back this week, correct?
He should be,
yeah. Based on that, I actually like Cooks again now with Tyrod Taylor. He's not the best quarterback out there, but he's certainly more consistent than Mills. So I don't mind that play. And again, I think people are going to be looking at Cole Beasley's game last week, and we've talked about it earlier on the show. I don't think Cole Beasley is going to get 10 receptions again this coming week. So you're probably going to see some decent regression out of Cole. And I think Cooks is going to have a decent game. So I would probably go Cooks over Beasley in that particular one. And then Henry Kittle's, I'm going to take Kittle coming back, week 1 over. I mean, Hunter Henry hasn't shown, in my opinion, anything to where I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I got to start Hunter Henry. And then the last question there, I think, it's been said in chat quite a bit. Michael Carter's really looked good the last few weeks with the Jets. tonight, I definitely would start Michael Carter over Gainwell because that's who knows what's going to happen in Philly. That's such a strange situation between Howard, Boston Scott, and Kenny Gainwell. And Latavius Murray, I don't believe he practiced today, if I remember looking at the injury report correctly. So, who knows if he's going to be even active or a full full go come this weekend for Baltimore. So I think Michael Carter's kind of a no-brainer tonight on that last question.
Same. Okay.
Same. Kittle's a stud. If he's good, you're starting him. Awesome playing with Tyrod with Cooks. And then Michael Carter with Tyrod. And then Michael Carter has the most certainty out of that entire backfield. Yeah, I'm rolling with that.
And he said, some others. He has Miles Sanders, Lenny Fournette, David Montgomery. So that's why he's in such a tough spot at running back.
Now, Montgomery's interesting. He's not playing this week, but he did just get brought back from the IR. So probably a week away for Montgomery. But obviously, Khalil Herbert's been decent for the Bears. So I'm interested to see how that plays out the next week or so.
Yeah. Right.
Another one here. Rich just touched on how questionable it's been for Gainwell. Zack Moss has been, I want to say, almost Melvin Gordon-esque in the sense where, I think everyone's ready for something more exciting or something different, but he's actually been semi-reasonable and has scored 16, 18, 12, 12. He did have a 5.9 week and then 11.8. He scored 11 or 12 points every week. It's not awesome, but it's been okay. So I think especially a matchup like Jacksonville where there's a really good chance of positive game script and 4-minute offense down the stretch, I very comfortably start Zack Moss this week in a lot of scenarios. If you're stuck, you need an RB2 or you have a really Buccaneers, Washington football team heavy bye week issue and you need a flex. I actually think Zack Moss is an okay play this week, and I'd easily take him over Gainwell here.
Yeah, I second that notion. I don't know. I like what Moss has done, and I think there's more certainty in terms of snap share and potential touches for him. I just don't know, to Rich's point earlier when we were talking about Gainwell just a segment ago, I don't know what's going on with Philly. When they look awful, they do good fantasy-wise, and then they do good in real football and are terrible in fantasy. They don't give certain guys the ball one week and then give them a huge workload the next. It's just very odd with everything in Philly. I just don't know what to do, and because of that, Gainwell could give you 20 this week, or he could give you 0.2, and I just think that's way too big of a spectrum.
Yeah, it's totally fair, and now with Boston Scott, Jordan Howard, and Jalen Hurts all potentially vulturing touchdowns, you can't really depend on Gainwell, and especially if it's a PPR. Zack Moss actually had 6 catches last week, which was his season high, which was kind of nice.
Here, right into it, Rich. Do you think Boston Scott will get double-digit this week in a non-PPR? Meaning, do you think he'll score again, basically?
Yeah, I don't think obviously the PPR probably matters much for Boston Scott or Jordan Howard for that matter in Philly. It's hard to say. I would probably put it over 50% chance that he gets a score this week. I mean, they have the Chargers at home. It's a 50-point over under.
They're actually a really poor run defense.
They're a poor run defense. So somebody, I think for sure one of Howard or Boston Scott's going to get a touchdown. Obviously, it's really impossible to kind of guess at who. They both were able to get in the end zone last week. But yeah, I think there's a decent probability that he gets in the end zone. I certainly don't think he's putting up 80 or 100 yards. So to Greg, your point, he's got to score. He's probably going to be in that 40 to 50 yard range, if that, because they're going to split those carries up between those 3 backs.
Anthony, how about this one for you? How do you feel about Damien Harris?
Sure, you don't want to answer this one?
Well, so I'll bring up, I was very excited and told people after the rough stretch after Tampa Bay, I'm like, hey, hold tight. The next couple weeks are Houston, Dallas, the Jets, and the Chargers. It's a good stretch to have him. We've now got through there. I will say, Carolina this week, Cleveland next week, that's not ideal. But then you still get Atlanta and Tennessee, so you get 2 more good matchups. Obviously, anybody's worth selling if somebody wants to buy high. So if you have somebody desperate in your league who needs a running back, he's not the worst guy to sell. But there's some additional nice matchups coming up here that aren't – Atlanta and Tennessee are bad defenses. So those are teams where I expect the Patriots to run it. And I think that Belichick has really put his chips in with him. I think that he's gotten over the fumble concern issues and that they're riding him. So it might not be awesome. You might have some of the 14 carries for 58 yards, but if it's 58 yards and a touchdown, it's not that bad.
Yeah, to your point, if it's all about value, if someone's willing you or offering somebody that you need, whether it's like a tight end or wide receiver, some kind of value there. Like I would never say no to trading somebody, but I'm holding Harris unless the value is there. I like the matchups going down the stretch. I also think you mentioned the fumbling points. The fact that Belichick didn't immediately turn away from him, given the fumbles, shows tremendous faith in him as a player, and Belichick has been rewarded with how Harris has done. And I spoke about it last night on Disguised Coverage a bit. I think the Patriots are a better team than people recognize right now. They're not really being talked about. I think they will continue to get stronger offensively as Mac Jones, it may not be a lot, but little by little every week, he just pushes the ball down a couple more yards downfield, little by little. That opens up Harris a little more. And I think he'll continue to have good red zone opportunities. I'm keeping Harris unless somebody's offering you like a top 14 wide receiver for him.
Charles G. asking here, we've said the same thing every week. An RB2 Superflex kind of situation, please convince me to play Darnold if he plays over Melvin Gordon or Boston Scott. I know it's hideous. I know it's ugly. It's still a quarterback.
Yeah, I was going to say it's still a QB.
The scoring for a quarterback, like a bad quarterback game is still 14, 15, 16, but like a bad quarterback game is a pretty good RB2 scoring game. So if a quarterback plays, the only scenario is you are stacked at wide receiver in a PPR, and you're talking about like the situation we were in earlier this year in our other league where you're sitting Brandon Cooks or Mike Williams on the bench, and you have that kind of depth, and it's, hey, you can maybe convince yourself that a receiver like that as your fourth guy and on the bench is going to outscore that QB2. Otherwise, it's a QB. You got to start a QB every week.
I agree.
I agree, but I'm also honestly, we said, because I believe I was in Seattle the last time we made this comment, and then I think it was with Geno Smith, and we were wrong on that one, because I believe the it was Geno Smith versus Antonio Bryant, if I'm remembering correctly, and Antonio Bryant certainly.
I was going to say, bringing it back to Antonio Bryant.
Yeah, in that particular game, and obviously, now a couple of things I'll say about Sam Darnold real quick. Obviously, the broad stroke of everything you just said is, yeah, it's right. Sam Darnold is struggling right now. I mean, 129 yards, no touchdowns, 111 yards, no touchdowns, a pick, 207 in a score the week before, 177, 3. So, I mean, he's had 4 bad games in a row. He's only projected from our friends over at footballguys.com for 12.5 points this week. I don't know. And I believe he was in a concussion protocol in week 8, if I'm not mistaken. So
yeah, he was limited at practice today. He did practice, but was limited.
I certainly would play him over Boston Scott.
Sure.
Melvin Gordon, I wish you had a little bit better option there, but if there was a little bit better option between those two players, I actually probably would sit Sam Darnold this week. For me, it's a coin flip, honestly, between Melvin Gordon and him.
Use it as an example here. In those 4 games that were really ugly, bad games, under 50% completion percentage, it was 11 points, 18.8, 3, and 11.6. So even in horrendous quarterback play, if you told me the last 4 weeks, is Melvin Gordon and Boston Scott going to be over or under 11, 18.8, 3, and 11.6?
Definitely not Boston Scott. I think Melvin Gordon's
it's probably close.
I think Melvin Gordon's right there. So that's why it's like, I wish there's a little bit better choice
for sure
there, because Sam Darnold he can't figure out how to throw the ball to anybody other than DJ Moore.
And the matchups are, Carolina.
Wait, hold on. It's a 41 point over under.
Charles just said he's in a -4 points per interception league.
No.
I don't know.
That's gross.
Yeah, no, that's not great at all.
Which is an interesting tweak in a super flex. That is an interesting tweak when you have 2 quarterbacks to make it -4.
Yeah, but if that's the case, then you might as well not do a super flex. Then I feel like you're kind of
it's an interesting.
It's an interesting tweak. The matchups for that question also play in, like Carolina playing New England. New England's defense has been playing well. Belichick is very familiar with Sam Darnold and doing things to make him struggle. It's seeing ghosts. And then Gordon, Denver goes to Dallas to play a sneaky, legitimate Dallas defense, but
neither of them are great matchups.
Yeah, neither of them are great. I think you're looking at 6 of one, half a dozen of another. I'm going to slightly lean Darnold like 52-48, but
you're probably going to need a garbage touchdown to make it worthwhile,
or hope that he busts off a run and he ends up with like 50 yards rushing, which he's done the last several weeks, which has helped his floor a little bit, which has been nice. But yeah, it's not great either way there.
Rich Taylor asking, I have to start Pittman Jr. tonight, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's almost in almost in wide receiver 1 territory. He's real close. I actually have him in a couple leagues, and I got him late, and I'm really happy with him. So yeah, I think without a doubt, I think at this point Pittman is a must start every week. With no real other analysis needed there.
Okay. Half their offense is literally throw it up to Pittman. He'll either catch it or get a DPI.
Especially with T.Y.'s out again, so I believe. So I mean, he's him and Taylor. Yeah.
I have a question while we're on that. Do we think there should be some sort of point scoring or reward for pass interference penalties that are drawn? Whether you give the receiver the points for how many yards the penalty was for, or half of it, some kind of something. Do we think that's something that should be tracked and scored in fantasy football, especially given today's NFL where there's so many flags for defensive holding, illegal contact, pass interference? Right? I go back and forth on it. It's so tough.
I think it's interesting. I think that you could do it. I'd be open to some kind of half scoring. You don't get the catch point, but maybe you get half the yardage. But it's hard because, then you get into some of the flags. Did the receiver really do much to get that? Or it's hard. It is one of the few plays in football right now that are incredibly impactful in the real game, but have no fantasy implication. Because you get frustrated sometimes with it, where you needed somebody to get some catches or some yards, and all of a sudden there's a 50-yard chunk of nothing from a statistical standpoint. Big, they're in the red zone now, so I guess I hope my guy scores. So there is a weird oddity to it. I don't know the right equation to get there. I don't know, Rich, if you feel strongly.
Yeah, Rich, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, I see the point. It does suck when, Michael Pittman in this example is, going downfield. He's a big wide receiver, and they just hold him because they, whatever. It's not college, right? Or they just hold him because they don't want to give up a touchdown, even though they can give up the big yards. That'd be hard to track. I don't know. Sure, I get the question. I don't know. I feel like that's a tough one for me.
So, Rich, you opened up with this early in the show, and James had asked about it here. I won't limit it to those two. I'll ask it in a different way. Is there any destination where you are interested in Odell Beckham Jr. from a fantasy standpoint?
I mean, people laugh. People joke and say, Brady's salivating, right? People go, hey, well, Tom Brady, collects. Belichick used to be Belichick, and Brady would collect, misfit toys up in New England, and now it's kind of like Brady's collecting the misfit toys a little bit down in Tampa, and obviously Antonio Bryant's been dinged up, but I just don't think Tampa doesn't need Odell. They have 3 wide receivers as it is. Green Bay.
I get why the Raiders were asked. They just lost, obviously, Henry Ruggs due to that horrendous situation. Yeah. Michael Thomas announced out for the year. Right. And then everybody throws out Kansas City, although Mecole Hardman's actually playing decent, and they already did that with Josh Gordon. So I don't think it's crazy. They could go there, but I think the Saints, the Raiders, and the Packers make the most sense football-wise for me.
Yes, and as a Browns fan, I'm honestly I actually hope they hold him for a while, because I'm terrified that he's going to get released. And then also what's interesting, and I'm not as cap savvy as you, Mr. Tompsett, but I'm fairly certain that if they do release him and if he's claimed on waivers, that team has to pay the balance of his salary, which is $8 or $9 million or something like that.
Someone asked me earlier when they were like, "Oh, well, yeah, but then the Chiefs don't have a very good record. They could claim him." I said, I will go on the record right now. There is a 0% chance any NFL team is claiming his existing contract.
Right. So yeah, he should most likely clear. I'm just terrified he's going to go to Baltimore, honestly, and just him, Lamar. With Bateman and Hollywood, and him, oh man, and Mark Andrews, oh god, I could just see him in black and purple.
He wouldn't strike me. He wouldn't shock me if he was a bit of a spiteful fellow.
Right? And he just signed so like that. I just
that would be so like Cleveland curse, right? Where he just balls out somewhere and he's doing it in the division. Like that would just be so like, of course.
Yeah. Right. So and actually I do think that the Browns, obviously they're not going to make a move at this point in this particular week. I do think they're going to hold on to him for a minute. There's been some kind of reports back and forth that, hey, I think he's saying all the right things. Aditi. I'm gonna kill her name, but
Yeah,
Aditi Kinawala, who is the a beat reporter in the AFC North. She does a great job, and she talked to some Browns insiders today, and they feel there may be some potential for a resolution there. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he will move on from the Browns, but I don't think it's going to, I don't think he's going to get released in the next week or two.
I think if it was going to happen, I think it would have been that culmination yesterday, like where the tension was really high and all the reports came out, and obviously his agent was coming in to ask about it, and they very clearly asked for his release. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had those rumors released, and obviously that was coming from the agent. The Browns have zero financial incentive to release him, short of reaching a settlement where it won't help the cap. But from a team standpoint, the cash, if they worked out a deal where he said, okay, fine, I want out of here so bad, I'll give back half my guaranteed salary. And that it's, hey, you only got to pay me $4 million to go away rather than $8 million for the rest of the year. And then the team just says, from a business standpoint, okay, all right, here. And you even can put conditions in there on, okay, but you can't sign within the division. You even could, like, it's a settlement, so it's a contract. You can reach whatever settlement agreement you want.
Yeah, yes, that could potentially happen.
That's the only way I could see it, because otherwise the Browns have no incentive to actually let him.
No, I mean, the only incentive the Browns have is just it's a distraction, I think. And obviously, when he was hurt, they all played better for whatever reason. I mean, there's been some, hey, he doesn't run the routes that they're he likes to improvise this, that, and the other thing. He doesn't run the routes that they're actually telling him to run. Obviously, him and Baker just never been on the same page. So there's some positivity just kind of removing themselves from that situation. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think, is going to be a good wide receiver. So they certainly have somebody. He's back at practice this week. He was out with a little bit of a groin injury for the last couple of weeks. So
deeper league, I put in a move for him yesterday in the deeper league.
I mean, and Baker's had some connection with them. So, I think that they're fine with that. So just a couple of questions in chat. Heather says Atlanta. No, I really don't think he goes to Atlanta, nor is I don't think Atlanta in a spot that they would want to pick him up.
I get the logical connection with Calvin Ridley being out, but they're not
contending, right?
Why would they want to?
That'd be chaos.
And Spin, did Cleveland release OBJ? No, they have not officially released Odell at this point. I think for sure this week, I don't think they will. We're too late in the news cycle. So maybe next week, but I think again they're going to hold him for a minute and see if anything can be done to resolve that situation.
And then kind of looking at, we had one more question here from Sir 31. Do I start Khalil Herbert or Emmanuel Sanders? Anthony, what do you think?
Oh, Herbert on Monday night against Pittsburgh. Manny. Ooh, I feel like the volume and snap share could. I'm gonna go Emmanuel Sanders. It's real tough though. I like Herbert actually as a player. I just don't know how that matchup plays out with how Pittsburgh's defense is rolling. The fans are going to be super geeked up after their victory last week against Cleveland. It's on home, or at home on prime time. I don't think it's a plus matchup for the Bears offense in any scenario, especially with a Fields who is still adjusting to the NFL and an offensive line that has not been protection helpful. I'm going to lean Manny. I'd be fine if he started Herbert, but I'm going to lean towards Manny. My only worry with Manny is that the Bills blow out Jacksonville early and he only has like 2 catches for 30 yards and then he sits for a majority of the game.
Our man Patrick was listening here, Rich, when we went through the segment, saying he is going to go with the Jordan Love option, but we can feel free to make fun of him when Carson Wentz goes for 386 and 3 touchdowns.
I will remember that, and I will send you the tweet to say, "Hey, I said Carson Wentz," but I get it.
You wouldn't do that, no way.
I may do that.
What?
It's bookmarked now.
Khalil, I'm just on the Khalil Herbert piece real quick. I agree, Anthony. I agree. The matchup's not great. Over/under's like 39 in that game. It's going to be low scoring most likely.
He probably gets more touches than Sanders, though.
But he's gotten 18, 19, 18, 23 touches. Granted, Vegas, Green Bay, Tampa Bay, San Francisco. But, I mean, he's performed pretty well. 75, 97, 100, 72. He's added in a spree. He had a 5-catch game against Tampa Bay. Fields is still struggling, but he's made a couple plays the last few weeks. I probably would go Herbert just because of the touches and hope he gets in the end zone. I guess obviously we don't know if that was a PPR league or not. Certainly in a non-PPR league, I would go Khalil Herbert. But
I would agree with that. I would agree with that 100% non-PPR.
All right, so as we're getting close to kickoff here for a game that I have virtually zero shares. Like I have 24 fantasy football teams. I have almost zero Colts or Jets. Like I didn't hate Jonathan Taylor, just never lined up right to get him. I was not nearly high enough on Michael Pittman, so I unfortunately have zero Michael Pittman shares. And then I think I have like Moore in a couple.
Elijah Moore
in a few, but as a backup. But I literally look through all my lineups because I always do before the show on Thursdays because I want to make sure my lineups are set, and I put anybody starting into the wide receiver running back spot, not a flex spot to give myself flexibility later. And I kept scrolling through. I'm like, I don't have any. I don't have anyone playing tonight in any league. I don't have any Jets or Colts. So as we just a little philosophically, as we start to get into that spot now, this is for the teams that are doing pretty good. You're sitting there at 5-3, maybe 4-4, but a lot of points scored, or you're 6-2, 7-1, 8-0, and you're now starting to think about playoffs. You're now starting to think about positioning yourself. Maybe it's trade targets and things like that, but even from a roster construction standpoint, are there any things you start to do to shift the way that you set things up or how you look at it matchup wise? Like I found myself looking at defenses in a couple leagues where some of the name value defenses, you start to look at the matchups coming up over the next stretch, and I was like, I'm never going to play them ever. I don't know why I'm going to own them anymore. And I just put in a move, and I'm like, yeah, this other team isn't that great, but at least they have matchups I'd want to play. And I catch myself looking at that, or kickers, and I'm like, well, he's got a bye week coming up, and I don't want to have to deal with that, so I'm going to try to plan ahead there. What are some things you start to think about? Or, I'm trying to think of some of the running backs that were like that. You had before it was like the Tevin Colemans, or now maybe it's like the Devontae Freemans and things like that, where like, hey, Latavius Murray. Is there really a chance that I'm going to play them now that I'm through some of the bye weeks? Do I go for a higher upside somewhere else? Do I have a second defense or a backup quarterback now just in case with those guys? What are some things, Rich, that you might start to consider or look at with your teams that you're lining up for the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just if I'm in a spot where my teams are doing well and I'm not going to do anything vastly different. I'm just going to try to protect what I've done to this point. So if I don't have a handcuff, I may look to make a trade to grab my handcuff. Yeah. If the maybe even like to your point, a lot of the leagues I play have deeper benches. So maybe to your point, like Latavius Murray, I actually have him a few leagues. Maybe, I will maybe let him go and go grab maybe even like another backfield piece to a running back just in case. Somebody that's out there in the waiver wire that's not the immediate backup. I'm just going to look to protect my investments that have gotten me to the point I'm in. And of course, for the leagues that still haven't passed their trade deadlines, I'm going to look to try to make some acquisitions, which I have a couple guys we can talk about in a second from that standpoint. But Anthony, I'll let you answer this question first.
Yeah, it's all about roster reinforcement for me. To build off Rich's last point with the trade piece, I like to look for playoff matchups and guys that I have who maybe don't have favorable matchups, and I can trade them for someone, even if it's in let's put some kind of package together. It may be even involving the same position grouping, maybe guys that are in that same tier where you can start a conversation with someone to get a trade, but maybe the guy who's lower ranked has a better playoff matchup, but they're in that same type of tier for you. I like doing that. I'm big with the whole defense thing. I like looking ahead already and seeing who's got plus matchups for playoff runs, especially going into the playoffs, and then in the playoffs themselves, start positioning yourself to be able to have, depending on how deep your roster and your bench is, having 2 to 3 defenses. That way you can rotate and you have everything set from there. Quarterback, if you have a stud at quarterback and you've been like, you know what, I'm just rolling with one QB. That way I have more depth on my bench. Start taking a peek at potential plus matchups during playoff time and down the road. God forbid something happens to your starting QB, and then you don't want to be scrambling on the waiver wire trying to decide between, two pieces of coal and hoping that one of them turns into a diamond. Started looking at that a little bit for some higher floor guys. And those are my three big ones.
I like that a lot, and I'll use one. I'll use Rich as an example. He made it from more of a forward-looking keeper standpoint, but a guy that I really like, Deebo Samuel. And you look at the 49ers, and this applies to Elijah Mitchell. It might even apply to Brandon Ayuk or George Kittle. So the next 2 weeks, they have the Cardinals and the Rams. Okay, that's kind of tough. Listen to the rest of the 49ers season. Jaguars, Vikings, Seahawks, Bengals, Falcons, Titans, Texans. Their entire schedule are bottom third of the NFL defenses.
Yeah.
And, I don't know exactly which piece of that offense is going to benefit, but it just means that you're not going to be stuck with those rough ones. Like, oh man, I don't know who I want to play. If you get an Elijah Mitchell, a Deebo Samuel, a George Kittle, you're going to feel very comfortable. And if you're going to bet on somebody, there's been a lot of comments lately about Brandon Ayuk, and the offensive coordinator literally said he's really learning how to be a pro, and whatever was going on early that got him in the doghouse, that offense is set up to be there. And I don't think it's going to happen, but there's even an outside shot that if they do pivot to Trey Lance, like that maybe Jimmy Garoppolo is even one of those guys that isn't crazy. If you've been streaming or you're in a 2 QB league and they have that situation with Darnold, that second quarterback, maybe Garoppolo actually has a decent run at the end of the year. That schedule is really intriguing to have that long of a stretch of 7 straight games of positive matchups is just pretty rare to find.
And those are the type of questions you should be asking. Like, again, that's a perfect example. Which receivers could I potentially acquire in a trade? Which quarterback might be something down the road? Even from a defensive perspective, if somebody got off the 49ers defense early and they're still there and you're looking like, ooh, look at those matchups, especially that one against Houston, the one against Atlanta, like that might be a defense I can stream that week. Like that's a perfect microcosm of all the types of questions and you should be asking and tires that you should be kicking.
So Rich, who are some of the names you're poking around at?
So I do want to get to this. This actually fits in this question here. Should this individual trade Antonio Brown for Mike Williams? And it kind of fits into this discussion because you're looking at kind of schedules down the stretch, right? We're trying to see who has weak schedules, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers have the best schedule for the wide receiver position for the rest of the year, as opposed to the Chargers. Again, depending on what sites you use, somewhere in between 20 and 23. So the difference there, I think, is enough. And also, as long as AB comes back, healthy, there's no major long-term issues there. I mean, he has a rapport with Tom Brady. Tom Brady likes to throw to veterans. Not that Mike, Evans and Chris Godwin are not veterans, but Antonio Brown's been around. He's won big games. So I think he feels that connection there. So I really like Mike Williams. I don't think at this point I would trade Antonio Brown for Mike Williams. Especially
sneaky question. I think people are like, oh yeah, Antonio Brown's had a decent season. On a points per game standpoint, he's wide receiver 6.
Yeah,
overall.
Yeah.
It's Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, and Antonio Brown.
Just like everyone predicted.
Well, and also, I mean, again, the target share there for him it's been really nice. And again, Tom Brady, I mean, he's slinging the rock. So, I love Mike Williams. He asked me this question 3 weeks ago. I probably would say, yeah, trade for Mike Williams. I don't know. Mike Williams, not quite Tyler Lockett-esque in a boom or bust fashion, but he definitely has some of those weeks.
Far off.
Yeah, so he definitely has some of those weeks where you're like, man, he got me 4. So I think I would actually hang on to Antonio Brown. But, I think that was just good building off of your schedule conversation. So take a look at that. And just some interesting points here. Again, from a schedule standpoint for wide receivers, Tampa Bay wide receivers, Dallas, the Jets, the Dolphins, the Raiders have the top 5 schedules at the wide receiver position from an ease of schedule standpoint for the rest of the way. So somebody that you may want to look at, and you probably potentially could get kind of cheap, Hunter Renfro. Now that Ruggs is out of the way, unfortunately, there for the Raiders, Renfro has actually been fairly productive and border, flexible in PPR leagues anyways. So I think, he's somebody that I look at. I talked about Jalen Waddle last week, even though he didn't produce a big game against the Bills. He had 11 targets still, so I would still be looking at somebody like Jalen Waddle. And I mentioned earlier Brandon Cooks. I think Brandon Cooks is going to have a decent, second half here with Tyrod back at quarterback for the Texans.
Well, Renfro, so far this season, again, super reliable. 13, 10.7, 18.7, 16, 11, 7, 13. And now you obviously remove Henry Ruggs from that equation. I do expect Waller to still be the primary beneficiary. I'll ask you guys real quick. Any interest in Bryan Edwards?
Yeah, I think, I actually liked him going into the season. Honestly, I had him on a few teams. I think I might even still have him rostered on a team. He has size, so I think there's definitely an opportunity there for him. It depends on, I think Carr has that rapport with Renfro a little bit, but yeah, I certainly think that Edwards, he's made a couple plays this year. I think Edwards has a shot.
Yeah, Derek Carr is having, I guess maybe it's not even sneaky as much anymore, but he's having like a really good year for Vegas there. And with Ruggs out of the picture now, they have some plus matchups coming up, including one against Kansas City. That's a very nice thing. I think that's somebody that you could take a nice little flyer on. So that's funny.
While I'm doing the stats, I'm doing it just because I just looked at the Antonio Brown. So I had the default ranking in average points per game. And as I looked to see where Derek Carr was, Mike White's a slot ahead of him. Because Mike White averages 23 fantasy points a game because it's just what he does.
QB1.
That's so
higher than QB1.
Yeah, what's higher than QB1?
In the same regard there, just since we talked about the wide receiver position from a strength of schedule, the top 5 strength of schedules for the remainder of the year for the running back position, Denver. So we can talk about Melvin Gordon a little bit, and even Javonte Williams down the road. If Denver falls out of the race, maybe try to go grab Javonte Williams.
They're investing in a young guy and have an easy schedule. That could be interesting.
That could be cool. The Giants, which screw the Giants, they're always a cluster. So sorry, Saquon. And
Devontae Booker has been a sneaky play. Like, he's actually had several 15, 18, 20-point games because they're off. It's the same thing when Saquon was healthy. Like, they're never pretty, but they just center so much volume to that spot that I've actually profited from Devontae Booker in quite a few leagues.
Same.
And also, obviously, their wide receivers are so banged up constantly.
Yes.
So, they have nobody to throw to.
They're just fine.
My Browns have the third easiest schedule, so that's obviously Chubb and Hunt. If Hunt comes back,
and
the next week
Odell.
or two. And, of course, Odell on the end arounds. But Chubb, I mentioned it last week, as a trade target just because, he was injured a little bit last week and Steelers didn't really get a ton going. You might be able to trick an owner into giving you Chubb. And I think, that sounds funny. You might be able to trick an owner into giving you Chubb.
No comment.
Third best, rushing schedule. And then Minnesota and Washington kind of even that out for the top 5 at the running back position.
I was just about to answer that in the chat. I think that's a win.
So we'll do the setup here first. So Azur had Josh Jacobs plus Elijah Mitchell, Alvin Kamara, and Antonio Gibson. He got offered Keenan Allen for Josh Jacobs and took it. That's a comfortable W.
Yeah, that's a very good W. Although I am a little
W.
We started speaking about Mike Williams. The air is kind of falling out of the balloon a little bit for that Charger offense. They're running a ton of quick game. Teams have kind of figured that out a little bit. They have to go heavy in order to run the ball. They can't run the ball out of spread. What New England did to them has kind of been happening the last several weeks. So I think the air is falling out of that balloon a little bit. I would potentially look to, if you could, that'd be an area like if I had like a Mike Williams or Keenan Allen and they put up a good week, maybe trying to trade them for somebody in that tier. But that's a team definitely to watch because they have so much talent, but they're
I'll
like
even
weird.
say these next 2 weeks are a good indicator for me because they started out really hot and then they've cooled down, but they've cooled down and it's against the Ravens and the Patriots. So they've cooled down against 2 very smart defensive coaches. And so now you go Eagles, Vikings. They do have Steelers and Broncos. So Steelers, Broncos, and then Cincinnati's actually been okay defensively. But they also then finish the year. The fantasy playoffs are Giants, Chiefs, Texans.
Oh,
so
matchups.
You got to be careful with that. Those are weeks where you're going to be very comfortable playing Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. So there might be some tough ones too. Steelers still have a legit defense. The Broncos are still a very good defensive team. But that stretch there where you get into the final stretch at Giants, Chiefs, Texans, I want pieces of that if I can get it.
That's very fair.
I know we got a couple final things here. The game just kicked off. So let's kind of go around. Not a game I terribly care about, but yeah, there is. And the kind of some final thoughts. Any picks for the week? Anything else that you have out there? Rich, any other targets that we didn't talk about that you thought were interesting? I actually think the Nick Chubb is an interesting one because there's been enough shine off of him with just missing football for a stretch, and not an awesome game, but obviously makes sense with the Steelers and their defense. So I do think he's an interesting buy low candidate, low relative to what a stud running back costs, but that is an interesting one that if you have a chance to get him, there's some nice matchups there.
Well, and also Kareem Hunt. I mean, so if you have the ability to take on another week or two from an injury perspective right now, and maybe there's a team that they're middle of the pack, right? And they have to put some wins together to get in that playoff picture. And you can give up a player right now that, is a little lesser value. And I think Kareem Hunt's going to come back within, 2 or 3 weeks and be productive. So either one of those from a Browns perspective. And then in the same regard, David Montgomery. I think David Montgomery is going to be productive in 2 weeks with the Bears. So that's somebody that I might, want to take a peek at if I can, get him for relatively, cheap-ish and be able to stash him for a few weeks if I'm in that type of a position where I can trade from an area of depth. So those, some guys I like trying to target those injury, those injury situations, and see if I can stash them.
Yeah, David Montgomery was my big one for that. I love where your head's at with that, especially from the perspective of, again, this is something we've talked about multiple times going back to draft time. I said this almost exact thing last week. Knowing your league, knowing the people in your league, type of like drafters they are, how they play the game, and then also knowing like what's going on in the league. Rich's point is so spot on. Somebody who they need a win this week, and if you can potentially entice them by giving them somebody they can put into their lineup to help them right now, and the cost is David Montgomery, who's still set like a couple weeks away from getting into their lineup, that's something you could kind of twist their arm a little bit into, not in a negative way, but you can kind of use that to your advantage. Same thing with Kareem Hunt. These guys who are hurt and who are on the sideline right now, and they're just taking up spot on their bench, try and get them to flip them to you for somebody who can help them right now. It's almost similar to like what we talked about during the Byemageddon episode, trying to trade for some of those guys then, because somebody's like, well, my team is completely screwed, and you can maybe take some of those players because they need somebody to fill in right now, and especially if they're in dire straits with their lineup. Again, it's all at this point, it's all that forward preparation and what are you going to do long term. This is the time when you have to start making those playoff moves and reinforcing your roster any which way you can.
Makes sense. All right, let's close it out with some picks here. I'll start, Rich, while you look at some of yours, and Anthony, think about ones that you like. I like this week. I think that there's a little bit of inflated value because of the Eagles kicking the crap out of the Lions, that the Chargers are only -2.5. I do think that the Chargers is just simply the better football team, and they just, -2.5, you basically just have to win. You're under a field goal. I like that one. There's a piece of me that wonders how that Denver locker room reacted to the Von Miller trade and kind of telling everyone that, yeah, we're not really playing for right now.
Season's over.
And you got Dak Prescott coming back. 9.5's a lot. So I get it. 9.5 is a lot of points. I do still like that, and I do like them a lot if you get into any teasers where you can pull that down and get it down into a more manageable number. I think that one's a healthy one. And a couple games like that. I'm also a little curious what's going to happen at quarterback with New Orleans. I think that Atlanta's, scrappy, getting 5.5 against a backup quarterback is a lot of points to there. I think that's a division game where I think Matt Ryan can maybe hang and keep it close enough, whether it's Taysom Hill or Trevor Siemian. That's just a lot of points for a backup quarterback to have to cover. So that's another one that I don't mind. Rich, what were some that stuck out to you?
You mentioned the Chargers. I agree with you on that one. I like Baltimore coming off a bye at home against Minnesota. Right now, it's still under a touchdown. So, I like them straight up. I also obviously love teasing them just to win at home against Minnesota. So that's one that I like. I like, the rain. I mean, Tennessee losing Derrick Henry, I think that's going to be tough. I don't know. They have to go to LA. They have to play the Rams. The Rams are a good team, good defense. I don't know. How does that team, kind of similar to your Denver situation, how does that team react to losing, their best player? So, the Rams 7.5, that's a decent amount of points. Again, from a teaser standpoint, I like the Rams getting them down to
Rams Ravens to win.
Rams Ravens seem logical to me. On the other side of that, if you try to look for teams that are getting points, I think the Browns are gonna come out a little. I don't know that they win the game against Cincinnati this week, but if you tease them up, I don't know that they get blown out either. I think I think Baker does play better when Modell's just not there for whatever reason. They're going to be able to establish the run. Chubb's back, so it's Cincinnati obviously just got beat by the Jets somehow last week. Okay. So I think that's a game that if you tease them up over a touchdown, I feel comfortable with that. So, but really for me, I would say Baltimore and the Chargers are the two that I like quite a bit this week.
Cool. You know who just scored a touchdown for the Colts? Naheem Hines.
Oh, son of a!
So that's an inside joke for the uninitiated. That's an inside joke that makes Greg, Rich, and I want to jump off bridge. So that's fun. Rich touched on some of them. I really like the Rams. They're 7-point favorite right now. I think, again, that you're just basic points there, like a touchdown win. I feel like they can easily win that game by like 10 to 14 points, given what kind of team they are. I like Pittsburgh at home on Monday night against Chicago. They're a 6.5-point favorite right now. I don't like the matchup for the Bears at all. Still keeping an eye on Khalil Mack. His absence means a lot to that Bears defense, who I still think is a little better than people give him credit for, but once that Deebo Samuel play happened for San Francisco, they just got beat down play after play, drive after drive. So I like Pittsburgh there. And similar to you guys, I really like that Chargers score line against Philly. I'm always wary of teams West Coast coming east, but I think the Chargers are just the better team. I think the Eagles are still inefficient in a lot of areas. I think the Eagles can make up for a garbage time point, so I also like the over potentially happening there. But as far as that's almost a pick 'em at 1.5 points, and I'm taking the Chargers on that every day of the week.
One more that I'll throw out there that I really like as a teaser is you mentioned Pittsburgh at home against a rookie quarterback, that Pittsburgh defense, and the same thing. I don't know that I want them to cover, but to tease it to win, I do think Patrick Mahomes beats Jordan Love at home. In Kansas City. Yeah. So if you give me that it's Kansas City down to 1.5, and Pittsburgh just to so all you need is Pittsburgh to win at home against a rookie quarterback and Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City to win at home against Jordan Love, I think that's a pretty sound teaser as well.
I really wish Aaron Rodgers was here to beat the Chiefs this week and help the AFC race a little more, but such is life.
Well, one other I'll throw out there just to kind of wrap it up, and because we tend to kind of go on favorites, I feel, but Houston with Tyrod back, Miami's, I don't know. I like 5. I think Miami might win the game, but I'll take 5.5 points with Tyrod back.
I'm all done betting against Houston with Tyrod back. Davis Mills, I hammered him every week. I was betting against him. Like, no,
games like that I think that's a solid point. Me personally, games like that just scare me when I feel like you got two bags of suck going against each other, and I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, and there are some elements of that Philly-Detroit game last week where if they play that 10 times, Philly doesn't blow them out like that every time. One of the outcomes here is Miami just houses Houston because they're the more talented team. There's just way more talent on that roster. But there's also a handful of those where they win, and that's why I wouldn't advise this. This is not a smart play. But the other way, teasing it, getting Houston up to 12.5, you put yourself in a good spot. But you never want to get into teasers with just horrible teams because they also, they're not super scrappy that are going to keep it close all the time, because sometimes they do just get blown out like Detroit last week and games like that. So
wild game
there.
Everybody scored but Hurts.
Well, and you talk about maybe a money line play. That's a fun one to look at. You can get plus 250 or plus 300 on Houston in some places. That's getting kind of sexy.
Tyrod.
Tyrod.
It's just fun to say.
On that note, make sure you're checking out our sponsors over at Underdog Fantasy. You can download the Underdog Fantasy app. So get yourself, if your fantasy team is in the tanks, but you still want a little bit to root for, go download the Underdog Fantasy app. Do some player pick'em parlays. You can go in there and be able to figure out who's going to go over under individually. Draft a new team and go and play against a group of people just for a 1 week league and be able to have some fun where you can enjoy and win some money if your team is not going well from a season-long fantasy standpoint. But make sure you follow Rich at Burn River Sports on the Twitter. Follow Anthony at pro__ANT. You can find me at Greg Tompsett. On behalf of Rich and Anthony, I'm Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Fantasy, and we are out.